In the year 922 AD, a Muslim ambassador passing through Russia saw something that would follow him for the rest of his life. Before burning a slave girl alive alongside their deceased chieftain, Viking raiders engaged her in intimate ceremonies, which Ahmed ibn Fadlan witnessed. His in-depth story reads like a horror film script, yet every word was true. What you're going to learn is based on historical records that show how Vikings utilized sexuality as a means of societal control, a weapon of battle, and a means of achieving eternal life. These customs inspired ideas of authority that still exist now and molded medieval Europe. Many historians first rejected the data as enemy propaganda because it is so unsettling. From sexual executions carried out for amusement to public wedding consummations that whole families watch, modern audiences would become physically ill as a result of Viking sexual rituals, which ranged from intimate funeral rites including human sacrifice to rape as methodical psychological warfare. The sagas, archaeological discoveries, and eyewitness reports provide evidence of a civilization in which pleasure and violence were inextricably intertwined. Your sexual role in Viking civilization dictated whether you died a social outcast or survived as a respected citizen. With the delicacy of a war axe, domination and power controlled all personal relationships. Two of the Vikings' most important ideas may literally result in your death. Rager. Men who were feminine or sexually passive were referred to by these labels. Viking law specifically declared that being called Vager warranted murder because it was such a severe insult. There would be no legal repercussions if you killed someone for implying that you were sexually submissive. Compared to a medieval caste structure, this produced a more rigid sexual hierarchy. The one who penetrated, the active partner, upheld social respect and manly honor. Along with losing his property, legal rights, and social status, the passive partner completely lost his manhood. We're discussing a society in which your social standing was established by your posture during intercourse. The legal ramifications were ridiculous by today's standards. Men who are accused of sexual passivity may not be allowed to carry firearms, inherit property, or testify in court. Basically, you could lose your citizenship if you were a lousy bed partner. Men have lost everything as a result of someone spreading false information about their sexual performance, according to the Icelandic sagas. Blood feuds that began over sexual insults abound in the sagas. The story of Burnt Yol tells of a fight that resulted in the deaths of dozens of people after one man declared another unmanly. Warriors who flew hundreds of miles to kill someone who questioned their masculinity are described in the Egil story. A murderous rampage could be sparked by the slightest suggestion of sexual subjugation. These insults might be weapons for women, according to the sagas. Wives who openly questioned their husband's sexual suitability ruined their reputations. In Lax's tale, a lady lost her husband's social status by divorcing him and accusing him of being overly tender in bed. Violence spiraled out of control due to the fixation on sexual domination. Men had to demonstrate their masculinity by aggression all the time, which increased conflict and necessitated greater dominance displays, because the fear of being labeled as sexually inactive kept males in line and strengthened the power structure that characterized Viking society. Sexual violence evolved into a means of social control. Sexual assault was transformed into a psychologically damaging art form by the Vikings. They knew that it was more effective to shatter a man's spirit than to kill him. The Klumhog, or shame stroke, which represents anal penetration by slashing or piercing a vanquished enemy's buttocks, was detailed in the saga. This violence wasn't sporadic. The purpose of the purposeful humiliation was to identify the victim as having achieved sexual dominance. From a Viking point of view, the brilliance of this method was that you could ruin someone's masculinity without actually doing it yourself. However, Vikings frequently transcended symbols. In order to shift masculinity from victim to winner, defeated adversaries, particularly leaders and warriors, were subjected to systematic sexual abuse. In order to show their total defeat, captive kings were publicly raped, according to the Valong's legend. Vikings believed that putting someone in a passive role literally takes away their masculinity and adds it to your own. The psychological effects were deliberate and catastrophic. A man who had been sexually assaulted could not honorably return to his community. Because he was labeled as unmanly, he was frequently shunned by his own people, instead of enduring the embarrassment. Several victims chose to end their lives. Other people were shunned and roamed around as living symbols of Viking might. The Vikings engaged in widespread industrialized sexual enslavement. Captives intended for personal use were piled high in York's and Dublin's slave markets. The sagas factually explain how raiders separated people like livestock, keeping the most desirable for the personal collections of leaders. According to the Yockney tale, Earl Seeger kept a collection of Irish ladies he had seized and used them as objects of desire. A two-tier structure established by Viking laws would give the appearance of progress in a parade. Captives had no rights at all, but free women were well protected from sexual abuse. Killing a slave for resistance hardly constituted a misdemeanor, and any free man might exploit a slave sexually. According to Iceland's medieval legal code, raping a free woman was punishable by death, whilst raping a slave woman was punishable by a fine equal to the damage to someone's property. This system was enormous in scope, up to 30% of the population. According to archaeological evidence from Dublin, may have been slaves, many of whom had been taken expressly for sex. Human trafficking for personal exploitation was the foundation of the Vikings' entire economy. There was a purposeful rationale to this methodical dehumanization. When communities learned of Viking sexual customs, they frequently chose to surrender peacefully, rather than put their members in danger of being treated in this way. More powerful than any sword, the threat of sexual assault became a weapon of conquest. In contrast, Viking weddings make contemporary reality TV seem elegant. Not only was privacy rare, it was possibly costly and difficult from a legal standpoint. To ensure proper consummation, the couple's first sexual contact had to be witnessed by the bride's family. The marriage might be deemed void, and the bride's family might demand the return of the dowry if there were no witnesses to verify that penetration had taken place. Imagine being forced to engage in sexual activity as your in-laws took notes for possible court cases. A porn director would have blushed from the amount of sexual symbolism in the event itself. Thor's hammer was placed on the bride's lap during the wedding as part of the Mjolnir ritual. This was universally interpreted as a fertility blessing, with a clear, phallic connotation. Following the priest's blessing, the hammer was distributed for attendees to handle, forming a group sexual rite masquerading as a religious event. The bride's virginity was to be publicly announced by the groom when he removed her wedding crown. The witnesses in attendance witnessed this event, and they escorted the couple to the marital bed. Fertility prayers, which were basically sanctified. Obscene talk were offered by priests and family members to bless the bed. Family members waited outside the door, listening for noises that would indicate the marriage was complete. While the actual consummation took place, bloody bed linens were inspected and put on display. The following morning is evidence of the bride's virginity and the success of the marriage. In the event that the marriage was ever contested, these sheets were frequently kept as legal records that might be produced in court. In many instances, dependable family members actually stayed in the room to testify as witnesses during consummation. According to Gretier, the Strong's narrative, the bride's uncle remained in the room throughout the wedding to make sure the union was consummated. Is it possible that your Uncle Mike might witness you having sex with your wife? There were severe legal ramifications. The bride's family might face fraud charges if she wasn't a virgin. The bride's family might demand payment for any damaged goods if the groom was unable to perform. Intimacy was viewed as a business transaction by the Icelandic legal laws, which outline precise punishments for a variety of sexual transgressions on the wedding night. These customs were solely concerned with politics, inheritance, and property. The financial and legal ramifications of the bride and groom's sexual performance outweighed their feelings. When dowries and lineages were involved, love was a luxury that Viking culture could not afford. The eyewitness report by Omad ibn Fadlan seems to be the most unsettling anthropological analysis ever produced. Historians tried to disprove his account of Viking funeral customs for centuries because it was so startling. Unfortunately for our faith in humanity, the majority of his findings have been validated by archaeological data.
Oh.
A multi-day orgy was held when a Viking chieftain passed away in order to ensure the chief's supremacy in the afterlife by transferring life force from the living. According to Viking belief, sexual energy may be transmitted to the dead and conveyed through personal touch. Ibn Fadlan provides a very detailed description of the selection procedure. "Which one of you will die with him?" the Vikings asked the slain chief's slave girls. One would volunteer, thinking she would be her master's eternal companion in Valhalla. The events that followed made contemporary horror films seem like kid-friendly cartoons. During the last several days before the burial, the selected slave girl had sex with several tribemen. She was revered as a sacred vessel that would transport the collective life essence of the tribe to the afterlife. "Tell your master that I did this out of love for him." The men truly thought they were giving the deceased chieftain their spiritual essence through her. Every day the ceremony got more intense. Ibn Fadlan explains how the slave girl was handed from one man to another while receiving escalating doses of drugs and alcohol. It was believed that every contact increased the spiritual strength available to the deceased leader. The slave girl was taken to the funeral ship on the day of the funeral for her last private meetings with 6 distinct men, each of whom stood for a distinct facet of the tribe's power. In its detail, Ibn Fadlan's narrative verges on becoming clinical. After that, 6 males entered the pavilion and engaged in sexual activity with the girl, and they lay her at the side of her master. In the finale, an elderly woman known as the Angel of Death stabbed the slave girl and strangled her with a string. The ship was then set ablaze while the tribe chanted rituals aimed to facilitate the successful transfer of sexual energy to the afterlife. These behaviors have been disturbingly confirmed by contemporary archaeologists. The remains of 2 women, one with evidence of violent death, were found at Norway's Oberg ship burial. Young women are interred with males of great status in similar tombs found throughout Scandinavia, frequently with signs of ritual killing. For the Vikings, this was the greatest honor imaginable. It was said that the slave girl transformed into a goddess who carried the combined might of the tribe to the afterlife. However, from a contemporary standpoint, it is among the most pervasive instances of sexual abuse masquerading as religious activity in recorded history. Both contemporary feminists and traditionalists would be perplexed by the dichotomy that Viking society produced, while enslaved women endured treatment that would have shocked medieval torture experts. Free Viking women had rights that would not be found anywhere else in Europe for generations. Free Viking women could easily return defective goods and divorce their husbands for sexual inadequacies. A woman might lawfully leave a man and take her possessions if he was unable to satisfy her, did not perform well in bed, or was viewed as unmanly in his behavior. Women were able to manage enterprises, inherit land, and ask males they wanted to marry them. A deep-minded person who ruled over large areas and arranged marriages for her male relatives is described in the Laxerdal legend. Some women rose to prominence as merchants, running their own ships and regulating trade routes. According to the sagas, wives filed for divorce from their husbands because they wore too feminine apparel or did not adequately defend their honor. In Niall's story, Halger left her husband because he wore a blouse that was too revealing of his chest. Believing this to be unmanly and a reason for divorce, Viking women were legally shielded from unwanted approaches. Laws made it quite evident that unwanted kissing or sexual contact carried severe penalties, such as banishment or even death. Consent was important to free women in ways that were unique to medieval Europe. However, there was a darker aspect to this mindset that exposes the actual character of Viking culture. Only free Viking women were entitled to these rights. Any free man may utilize enslaved women for sex without any legal repercussions because they had no rights at all. Slaves were clearly property to be used as their owners saw fit, according to the same legal rule that guaranteed free women's sexual autonomy. The contrast was cruel and deliberate. Viking civilization reaffirmed that freedom was valuable and slavery was the height of depravity by granting free women rights never before granted. The incapacity of an enslaved woman to decline intimate approaches was even more obvious than that of a free woman. Viking women took an active part in the violence that was prevalent in their society. The sagas tell of women who urged their male relatives to engage in sexual violence against foes, and archaeological evidence from places like Burka indicates that some women were warriors. They realized that upholding the system that held others in slavery was essential to their own freedom. Infant girls were frequently slain or abandoned if their families could not afford to keep them. Even though Viking women were granted considerable privileges as adults, fathers exposing undesired daughters and putting them outside to perish from cold or wild animals was mentioned in passing in the sagas. This led to a society in which most women lived lives of cruel exploitation, while a few liberated women possessed considerable influence. The sexual hierarchy established by Viking views on same-sex unions was so intricate that legal experts had to figure it out. As long as you complied with the regulations of who might penetrate whom, homosexuality was totally fine. According to the sagas, warriors traversed Europe in search of both male and female sexual conquests. According to the legend of Eric the Red, some men treated sexual domination as a way to amass trophies by keeping both wives and male companions. This behavior was not only acceptable, but also praised as long as they continued to play an active part. Sexual politics even affect the gods. Loki was frequently made fun of for assuming the body of a woman and having children, including Sleipnir. Odin's eight-legged horse, Odin himself came under fire for engaging in cedar, a type of magic often used by women. Because Odin participated in activities deemed feminine, other gods questioned his masculinity, according to the prose ATA. The intersection of gender and sexuality in Viking society is demonstrated by the cedar practice. Because they were adopting women's roles, men who used this magic were frequently viewed as urgy and sexually abnormal. The most powerful men were, paradoxically, also the most sexually suspicious because of their magical power, which was both feared and revered. With characteristic Nordic accuracy, these nuanced opinions were represented in Viking law. There were harsh penalties for accusing someone of sexual passivity, even though there were no explicit laws against homosexuality. The legal codes demonstrate that sexual insults were treated more seriously than many violent crimes, with false accusations of sexual passivity carrying punishments equal to murder. Men who displayed any feminine characteristics, whether via demeanor, attire, or sexual behavior, and the risk of being completely destroyed by society. Every facet of Viking civilization was influenced by the enormous demand to uphold masculine dominance. With the zeal of contemporary reality TV producers, Vikings transformed sexual assault into public entertainment through their religion practices, work choices, and wardrobe choices. Justice created a legal system that functioned as sadistic theater by emphasizing spectacle as much as punishment. The penalties meted out to criminals found guilty of sexual offenses were intended to degrade them in the same manner that they had degraded their victims. Rapists may be subjected to public sexual assault as part of their execution, with the audience applauding as ironic violence was used to bring about justice. In front of spectators who viewed the events as if they were athletic competitions, adulterers might be castrated. Beyond just being fair, these penalties had other uses. They amused the general public while using sexual shame to uphold societal structures. The public nature gave Vikings a reason to indulge their appetite for imaginative murder, while also sending unambiguous statements about the distribution of power. According to the sagas, sexual assault was a planned feature of the entertainment. During festivals, for the enjoyment of the Vikings, captured adversaries were made to perform disgusting activities, and audiences bet on how long the victims would endure various sorts of sexual torture.